Fantastic. Okay, good. So it's a very interesting topic. And it's also a very interesting time in the world where we're looking at this idea of cohesion, social cohesion, and even what sits beneath this idea of cohesion. And as I was thinking about this presentation, the first thing I was thinking, to be really honest, because the time in London, so we're based in London, is exactly 2 p.m. And when I was thinking about the presentation, as I was just getting everything together, the first thing I kept thinking about was food. Okay, that was the first thing on my mind. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. I have this reflection, food, food, food. And I can understand that by that meditation, my body is telling me something. It's telling me, okay, it's around this time that you usually take a meal, that you get some nourishment. But it's interesting that there is a link between our reflection and certain messages. Because in much the same way that someone may think about food, which can be their body telling them something, it is interesting that as a humanity, we're constantly thinking and fantasizing about happiness. We're constantly thinking and meditating upon how we can be fulfilled. So people may think about a film star. They may think about a marriage, a relationship, a wedding, whatever it is, some meditation or some reflection. It's interesting. You can even trace this back in psychology. It's found that in some areas of psychology, they understand that if you're constantly thinking about reasserting yourself, if you're constantly thinking about speaking back to someone, if you're constantly thinking about dominating a certain conversation or relationship, that one thing can indicate that there's something that you need to say that you are not saying. So there's a natural relationship between meditation and certain underlying needs. So when we understand this, then we can think of it from the physical body and the meditation that indicates something about our needs physically. We can take this through to the social body, to the societal body, and what various situations, various instances, various conflicts, what they can be telling us that we need as a humanity. There was a seminar I was listening to recently, and they were touching upon various aspects of neuroscience. And one of the most important things that really stood out to me, they said that the thing that really rewires the brain, the thing that literally changes our neural pathways in the most powerful way, is the feeling of bliss, the feelings of deep fulfillment and happiness. So this whole weekend is celebrating what we call the Rath Yatra festival. The Rath Yatra, the word itself literally means festival of chariots. And in this festival, we have divine personalities who are moving. They have 3 different carts, and many of you will have been at these festivals in Toronto or possibly around the world, where different forms of the Supreme are literally moving amongst the mass of society. And it is literally symbolic of also re-inviting the divine to enter into our lives. And one of the most, let's say, addictive aspects, but hidden aspects of divine lifestyle or spiritual connection, one of the most deepest aspects, but often forgotten in the modern world, is the aspect of ecstasy. That literally, it is a recognition that all of us, we're searching for the highest happiness. Every single one of us in life, we're searching for the highest happiness. And in Sanskrit, which is one of the most ancient languages known to humankind, they often use this term Anandamaya. That all of us, by definition, we're always seeking pleasure. So if life is the pursuit of pleasure, then wisdom would be the insight into where we can get that pleasure in the deepest way. At the same time, even though we're pursuing these pleasures, often the same thing that may cause us happiness one day may at some later stage cause us to feel dissatisfied. You know, I was reflecting on the powerful imagery that we see in the movie industry. And the powerful industry is not just the powerful imagery is not just the imagery we see on the screen, right? So sometimes they'll talk about the chemistry between certain characters in a movie. But there's another type of imagery, and that is the imagery of the relationships. You know, so I still check this out every now and then, because one of my friends was on there recently. But generally, when I was young, you know, they had what we call the Oprah effect. So you would sometimes see Oprah Winfrey, who's a famous host, and she'd be interviewing different celebrities. And it may be a celebrity couple who had just got together. Maybe they were engaged. Maybe they were about to get married, and you know, she'd be invited to the wedding. And it was very powerful because when you see the imagery and the interaction, you'd have these individuals and they would speak very kindly. They would be charming each other, you know, flattering each other. And you'd think this is the perfect relationship. Only to find out 4 months, a year, 2 years down, that the whole situation had crashed. And it's easy to think, how is that possible? How could such harmony have come to the point of such harm? So from seemingly harmony to harm. I was in central London, one of the most famous people in the world. I saw him as I was in the square. So in central London, I was in a place called Soho Square. And in that particular space, one of the offices belonged to Sir Paul McCartney. He was one of the founding members of one of the most popular bands in modern history, the Beatles. And it was interesting because someone I know had spoken to him maybe it was a couple of years before I saw him. And at that time, he was going through a very painful divorce. And he started speaking to this friend of mine about what he was going through. And one of the things which was very much paining him was that, you know, he'd amassed this huge wealth over decades, millions of pounds. And then in the divorce proceedings, he was going to lose literally half of the money that he had worked very, very diligently over many decades to amass. So from harmony to this state where he was feeling harm. And I was trying to understand this as a metaphor for ourselves as individuals, as a metaphor for the interactions amongst societal members, and also linking it to this idea of re-inviting the divine, the idea of reasserting a way of life and a connection that can lead to ultimate happiness. And I wanted to really explore, first of all, what are the obstacles? What is it that causes a sense of disharmony? And how can we realign ourselves, realign our lives to find a lasting sense of peace, a lasting sense of being whole? And I wanted to explore these 3 ideas in this way. Before we got to that, I wanted to share this quote, because this quote very much leads to this idea of harmony. And this is a very interesting quote that I came across from Gandhi. Happiness is when what you say, what you think, and what you do are in harmony. But I wanted to add something to this. Happiness is when what you say, what you think, and what you do are in harmony with who you really are. Okay, I just want to add that point. Happiness is when what you say, what you think, and what you do are in harmony with, we sometimes call this the real self, right? The essential, the lasting identity. So we'll come back to that idea in a moment. So there's this constant search for happiness. There's this constant concern for wholeness. And we just need to know how to experience these goals in the deepest and most lasting way. Everyone is looking for harmony. Everyone is looking for pleasure. Everyone is looking for ultimate pleasure. But so often in life, we strive for it. Sometimes we think that we've achieved it, only for the whole thing to slip through our fingers at some later point. So I wanted to go into a discussion around 3 different dynamics, 2 of which we see in society, and 1 that we need to bring more into the social body by bringing that 3rd principle more into our lives ourselves. So let's look at these 3 dynamics which can help ourselves, and then we'll end with some ideas on what we can do to transform the harm once again into a deep and lasting harmony. Okay, so this is the truth, right? The truth about really how we can be a real change agent in bringing or transforming harm back into harmony individually, but also very much collectively in society. So let's explore these 3 dynamics. So we can break it down in 3 ways, and we can talk about 3 types of intelligence, what they lead to, and also how they can really help us on this journey. The first discussion will be on IQ. So we've all been through the education system in our respective countries. So IQ is very much a functional kind of intelligence, abstract reasoning. So we use logic to try to understand something. And very much with IQ, it is very much to do with the idea of rational reason. I studied, my undergraduate degree was in philosophy and economics. And it was very interesting because in philosophy, you would constantly look at different Western philosophers giving their speculation about something. So we were looking at things such as, what is the real self, right? Am I my mind? Am I my body? Am I something else? We would be sometimes looking at how do you determine if there is a supreme, okay? How do you know? Now, what was really interesting when we tried to look at philosophy just through IQ, what was interesting is that we could say that the modern philosophers, one thing that they all had in common, I'll use the term very slowly, was what I call conclusophobia. So conclusophobia is the fear of coming to any conclusion about anything. In other words, they would speculate. And speculation indicates we haven't truly understood something. So I'm guessing in one way, then another person would look at my guess and find the weaknesses, often because they want to assert their own ego. And the easiest way to assert your own ego is to find the flaws in something that someone else is pulling forward. Then another person would come and find the flaws in that counter argument. So it's a race to the bottom, right? Different speculations, no conclusions, and just finding weaknesses in someone else's idea. And of course, we can understand that modern society, when it's just functional, right? When it's just functional, when it's just looking at how we can achieve a certain external or material end, it doesn't give the full satisfaction that people are looking for. I was actually, interestingly enough, I was exploring something about the power of social media. And I was watching an interview, and the interview was by one of the early founders of the Facebook, company. So he was there in the early days, and they were looking at Facebook and how to create it and the different platforms within Facebook and how they work. And he was expressing a tremendous sense of regret, which was very interesting. And he was even going so far as to say that he'd seen that those platforms in many ways were causing so much discord. And he went on to explain why. So there's a thing called persuasive design. And he was explaining how many different aspects of social media are designed in such a way to make people literally addicted. So for example, when you are on WhatsApp and you see that green sentence that indicates that someone else is typing a message that they're going to send to you, or you see a green message that says that someone else is recording an audio message, then it creates a heightened sense of expectation. And when you keep creating that heightened sense of expectation, something is about to come my way, then it starts to create a dopamine hit, which is a certain particular chemical that's released within the brain. And then one starts to become more and more addicted. And he was saying he was regretting this because he knew that the whole platform was designed in such a way that you make people addicted to your platform. Then you go to businesses and you tell the business, look, I've got this many billions of people who are addicted to my platform. So if you pay me, I will give you permission to advertise your product or your service to my addicted audience. So many speakers, many philosophers have spoken about this. The idea that something is abstract reasoning, IQ. We just look to see how we can be functional to achieve an outcome without considering the ethics. When we start to think about the ethics, when we start to think about human-centeredness, human needs, then we go more from IQ to incorporate EQ. So when we go just beyond the functional, the systematic, to look at the emotional, then it brings another area of consideration. It is said that leadership, for example, good leadership is not just functional. It's not just you do what I tell you, but it then starts to deal with the real human needs. Businesses right now are constantly looking to focus more on EQ because they understand, ironically, in this socially connected world, that if people come to a company, communicate or engage with a brand, or work for an organization, and they feel that they're mistreated, they feel that they're not valued, they feel that their needs are not honored, respected, and acknowledged, then what happens? Then that individual disconnects from the company, right? So they may leave that company. In fact, we often hear this, that when people leave an organization, they don't leave the organization as a whole. They leave the particular manager or the particular team who they feel did not deal with them properly. So beyond IQ, we come to EQ, which goes a bit deeper than just the externals, which goes a bit deeper because if the IQ is the mind, then the EQ is starting to talk about the heart, the feelings. How do you feel? There's a very famous saying Now, I think many times if you go online, it's attributed to Maya Angelou, but I heard recently that it didn't come from her. Either way, there's a very famous saying, and many of you will have heard this before, that people may forget what you said, they may forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. They will never forget how you made them feel. So EQ touches upon the heart, the emotions. And when society goes from just being functional to just getting something done, to just scaling things, when it starts to go deeper to the heart, to look to understand human needs, to look to understand universal human dynamics, and starts to focus more on these as a goal, then you start to see a society which is more cooperative. So you could consider, if it's just IQ, if it's just about output, then you could say it's just about profit. When you go to EQ, my own spiritual mentor, he would often talk about people over projects, okay? Or he would also sometimes talk about people over profit. So that the profit motive, the productive motive, would have to be subservient to the people motive. And where we are talking about production, where we are talking about profit, those things will be used in such a way that they would ultimately serve the higher goal of taking care of the deeper needs of people. So as a society, we still see so much dominance on IQ. So we can achieve many things, but we're using the people in many cases to get certain output, rather than understanding how to create a human-centered society where things are created and they are progressively utilized only to the degree that they help to harmonize the ultimate deeper needs of human beings. So the profit motive must be subservient to the people motive. Okay. Now, when we come to this deeper culture, when we look at spiritual culture, that means lifestyles and traditions which have access to deeper wisdom and deeper insight, then we take it a level beyond this. So we have IQ, so intelligence quotient, EQ, emotional intelligence, but there is something that's even beyond all of these. So we wanted to introduce you to this idea of SQ. The idea of SQ literally means spiritual intelligence. And when we talk about spiritual intelligence, what are we then doing? We're adding another level to intelligence. We're adding another level that allows us to make decisions which will not only be harmonious for us in the short term, but will give us deeper levels of happiness and prosperity, not only in the long term, but you could even argue a happiness and a fulfillment and a prosperity that will last forever. When I was young, I was reading a book. It was called The Spiritual Laws of Financial Success. And it referenced something that's actually being done in literally most, let's say, spiritual cultures. In most spiritual cultures throughout humanity, they recognize that everything that we interacted with in the world literally was coming from an ultimate or divine source. And the recognition was that in life, as we show gratitude to that supreme source, and as we literally use those particular items that have ultimately come from that supreme source in the way that the Supreme was pleased, that it would literally lead to great prosperity. And I started to research this idea, and something amazing came. And then I started to see something in my own life that I thought was even more amazing. So I wanted to share this with you, because one of the most important things for me is that we don't just have theory, but we can speak from personal experience. And then not only do we go beyond theory, not only do we go beyond personal experience, but we give tools, understandings, insights, and literally a mindset that can allow us to experiment with spiritual understanding and to go from a theory to a deep fulfillment. So what I'd started to discover in terms of this idea of spiritual laws of financial prosperity, or let's put it another way, let's say spiritual laws of abundance, was that for those people, first we'll start with the theory or the understanding. Then we'll talk about my experience. A very powerful understanding was that for those people who lived a life which was oriented by gratitude, right? And I don't mean gratitude in some kind of vague sense, but they, in their interactions, would consider that everything that's coming to me in my life and all the things that I have use of, whether it's the job I have, the finances from my job, whether it's the air that I breathe, I'm looking out into my garden, whether it's the ability to connect with nature, whether it's the wisdom and insights that I'd gained, right, through teachers, spiritual teachers, gurus, etc. Those people who were cognizant, who were aware that all of these things were gifts, and who lived a life with gratitude for those gifts, what they found, and even science, psychological and scientific studies have found a similar thing, the first type of abundance that they experienced was internal. So for such people, what would tend to happen is that they would experience, and they were seen to experience, much greater levels of satisfaction in their day-to-day lives. Now, there's a stage beyond this, or there's a stage connected to this. And I wanted to share this because this is something that I often reflect on from my own teachers. Recently, one of my favorite teachers passed away. He was an extraordinary spiritual gentleman, a leader, a teacher, who touched the lives of many people, including my own. And I was trying to understand, what was it about him that really had such an impact upon me and so many others? And there were many things. I once went to visit him in a place called Ujjain in India. And he built this extraordinary community, right? And as part of the community, you had guest houses, you had a restaurant, and there was a huge spiritual center, incredibly beautiful, built, white marble, just so well done. I believe the white marble they'd actually imported, from different places in the world. But what was more powerful than all of these things, all of these external achievements of abundance, was his character. And when I started to reflect on his character, what really stood out to me was this person was overflowing with such love and care for people. And I often saw this, I don't know how else to say it to you, this person, he was just so blissful. There was not one time that I saw this person, he was a guru, a spiritual teacher. There was not one occasion that I saw this person that he did not seem intensely happy, right? And you know this, right? You know some people, you're around them, and when they see you, they just break out into a smile. But it's not forced. It's not a mask. Their mood towards you is literally an eruption from something very deep within themselves. And the way I look at life now, through many years of interacting with spiritual teachers and also trying to engage in a spiritual practice myself, I'm always trying to trace back from the symptoms to the cause. And I know that with this particular person, his life was really a life of service and a life aligned with what I call divine laws. In other words, he was very, very spiritually wise and intelligent. He lived his life in alignment with these divine laws, seeing everything as literally a gift from the Supreme, but also seeing others, and this is what I was getting at, seeing others as a gift from the Supreme. So when I was reflecting on this example, it reminded me of what I'd also learned from another mentor of mine, a very close mentor of mine, who wrote a book called Spiritual Warrior Number 2. And in that book, and I've over the years, over the decades, I've tried, often failed. I keep trying, but I've tried to more and more live by this principle of seeing those who I am in relationship with, whether it's friends, whether it's family, whether it's my partner. I've tried to live a life of seeing them as a gift from the Supreme, as literally a gift from the Supreme Lord. And I've tried to, again, many times failing, but I've tried to more and more live life with a mindset that I see that this person is a gift from God. So then if I recognize that, then what I'm trying to do in my interactions with that person is to serve them and care for them in the way that literally the Supreme Person would be pleased. I'm very much of the view that what goes around comes around, and many of us know this. Many of us have seen this in our own lives. So what I started to notice, as I tried, sometimes succeeding, many times failing, to have this mentality, what I started to notice was that the more that I lived in this way, the more that I tried to deal with others in a way that was loving and that was caring, the more I started to find that exactly the mood that I gave out to other people was often pursuing me in my own life. What is the difference between harm and harmony? The factor that transforms harm to harmony is healing. And what does it take to heal an individual? Individuals are healed to the extent that we are able to communicate and they are able to be receptive to that healing balm that you and I, that we all know as love. I was giving a seminar recently on spiritual relationships, and we were talking about the importance of loving exchanges, loving relationships. In our Krishna conscious tradition, we talk about this, we call this Priti Lakshanam, loving exchanges. And in the seminar, I was addressing one of the key obstacles to loving relationships. And one of the key obstacles is burnout. And there's even a term in the secular society now, they know about this. They call this compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue. You're trying to give to another person, but at a certain point, you're starting to feel weak. You're starting to feel empty. You're starting to feel resentful. You're starting to feel angry. You're starting to feel disgusted. Why? Because the ecosystem wasn't there. The connection wasn't there. Right? So again, We want to transform harm to harmony, which requires healing. And the greatest source of healing comes from love. Comes from love. When people feel loved, valued, accepted, acknowledged, heard, then real and lasting healing takes place. But there are obstacles. There are obstacles to that healing process because there are obstacles to that flow of love. So when I saw this person who passed away recently, I felt to myself, why was it that he was able to do this and do this consistently without burning out? Why was it that my other mentors were able to do this consistently without burning out? And it was so clear to me. It was so clear to me that the most important thing, there was two dynamics. One is, if they wanted to care for others, they would also need to be caring for themselves. Right? So as they cared for themselves, they would keep themselves in a condition where they could also care for others. But even more than that, and this is again, excuse me, this is again linking to this theme of Rath Yatra, this festival of chariots, this festival where the Supreme comes out, right? Where we literally become again receptive to the presence of divinity within our lives. When I looked at that theme, I saw this point of connection. So many of you on the call, many of you in this session, you engage in yoga. And yoga literally means union. And just as you can have a yoga of the physical body, there is also a union or a yoga that takes place on the level of the soul. And that practice of yoga, which is part of the tradition that we are aligned with, that is literally called Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of love and devotion. So what I saw in this personality was that if I wanted to be like him, and he was just so inspiring and so loved by so many people around the world. And I realized if an individual wanted to be like him, where you could give this love freely, not foolishly, he was a very wise person, a very kind person, he had such a mood that if you were just around him, you would feel healed. It was incredible. And I saw that if someone wanted to be like him, one of the most important divine laws that they would have to follow is that they would have to themselves cultivate a real connection with divinity. You see, if I want to give something, I must be also receiving. Right? As I receive that deep and pure love and affection, as I open myself up to that, then I have the supply that I can give freely, I can give wisely, and I can do so again and again without burnout, without compassion fatigue. So when I thought about this idea of Rath Yatra, this idea of the Festival of Chariots, this huge festival which takes place around the world, this idea of reconnecting with divinity, I started to realize that the more that this would take place on an individual level, the more that it would automatically expand on a society level. And when I look behind all of the different disagreements and discord in society, when I look behind the eruptions of harm, when I looked at my own aspiration for harmony, I saw that the real solution was this healing that comes from divine connection. Now, for many of us, this is something that we've heard. We may have in our own lives had intuitions around this. And let's explore that. When we say we've had intuitions around this, why do people go to psychotherapists or psychiatrists? Why is the self-help industry literally making billions of pounds or dollars every single year Because our deepest intuitions are for wholeness. Right? Why is it that we sometimes will reflect on our childhood, or we will reflect upon our upbringing, we'll reflect upon what we were given or what we weren't given? Because we're searching on this journey, beneath the surface of all of our activities, on this journey to transform harm into harmony. To experience this synergy, this wholeness, and this happiness that we know is out there, and that we deeply are driven to pursue. So for me, it was incredible, this idea of connection, divine connection, reconnection. We could say Rafa Yatra symbolizes a reunion, a reconnection with divinity. So if we know that this is very powerful, in fact, how do we know this is powerful? Just take a moment to meditate on this. I'm going to ask all of you to close your eyes. And I'm going to ask all of you to imagine what your day, what your interactions, what your relationships would be like if every single moment, every single day, every single interaction was literally flooded with affection. Coming to you, coming through you in your dealings with other people. And that you were able to release that love freely. You weren't fearful of being mistreated. You weren't fearful of being exploited. You weren't fearful of being manipulated. You had affection coming into your life, into your consciousness in unlimited supply, and you were giving that freely. Just imagine that. And then take it further. Take it a step further. Imagine that the affection that you were giving out to your interactions with people was constantly coming back to you and constantly filling your heart and your life in deep, loving pleasure, loving joy. And that from the moment that you woke up, through the moment that you slept, even in your dreams, you were feeling this great abundance of love, affection, and joy as a day-to-day experience in your life. Imagine that. And in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, that is literally the essence of the spiritual practice and the spiritual lifestyle and the spiritual wisdom that guides such a lifestyle. A lifestyle of connection to divinity, connection to the Supreme Person, and through that connection to an unlimited supply of love and affection that we then also share freely, wisely, compassionately in all of our day-to-day interactions in the world. Just imagine. And I often reflect about this with my teachers, those who are present, those who have moved on, who've passed on, those who are very accomplished in this sense. And I sometimes think, wow, if only I had a sense of how much ecstasy and joy and bliss and fulfillment and abundance they must have been experiencing, because these people were very high in spiritual intelligence, not just even theoretically, but they were experiencing. I often caught a glimpse of what they were experiencing. And we want to make that same opportunity available as widely as possible to as many people as possible in order to transform harm into harmony through healing. So let's look at some ideas about how this can be done, and then we'll open up for questions. So there are 3 things we wanted to leave you with as considerations. So the first one, And this is a very mature point, but to be honest, life is short. Life is short. We don't know when we're going to leave the world. So we want to make every moment count, not by giving superficial cliches, but by giving nuggets of wisdom that if we're able to take these things on board, will literally transform the quality of our lives, transform the quality of our love. So the first, I call these sutras, which means a short statement which is packed with wisdom in a concentrated form. So the first sutra is that the magnet of the mind, draws us to situations. In other words, there are no accidents. There are no accidents. I want you to consider that the entire world, right? The entire world, your entire existence, our entire existence is like a living classroom. And that the magnet of the mind is drawing various lessons into our lives. Now, let's be very honest. Many of us hated school, right? Or school was boring. But there's something very powerful about the education system. What is the most powerful thing about the education system is graduation. When you master a lesson, then you graduate. When we master lessons in life, then we become, we celebrate. Every time we master a lesson in life, we come to a greater threshold of experience and we come to a greater sense of rejoice. In modern psychology, there's a very interesting thing that they found. I was listening to something. It was a presentation by one clinical psychologist who was explaining anxiety and why people are, in many cases, are experiencing anxiety. And it was a very interesting explanation. And I'm not saying that this is the only explanation. And I'm not saying that if we have some very chronic sense or deep issues with the mind, I'm always recognizing that if we have these things, we should get the help that we need professionally. But just a one point on this, he was explaining how in some cases, when people find that they're triggered by anxiety and nerves, then what can be happening is that the subconscious mind is sending a message to the conscious mind saying that I'm fearful that we have not mastered the situation that we are in. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So if you go through an experience in life and you don't draw the proper wisdom and necessary understanding from the experience, if you go through an experience and you get unnecessarily hurt or mistreated in that experience because you did not know how to navigate that experience, how to deal properly in that experience so that you were able to come through the experience in a positive and constructive way, then the mind takes notice of that. This person, when they go into this experience, they suffer. So whenever that experience is replicating itself again in your life, the subconscious becomes triggered. Oh my God, no. Alarm, alarm, alarm. We're in that experience again that last time caused you to suffer. What turns off the trigger? The thing that turns off the trigger is wisdom. So it comes to point number 2. When the subconscious mind is assured through deep self-work, through accessing and digesting, personifying, living according to deeper wisdom, deeper insights, literally about the meaning of life. When we assimilate wisdom such that we can enter into those experiences again that previously we were naive about, or when we can enter again into those situations where previously we acted in ways which were not ultimately in our best interests, but when we can re-enter with new understanding, new wisdom, a maturer perception, but digested in the form of a maturer personality. When we can enter into those situations again with a greater sense of mastery, then we're no longer triggered, because the unconscious is now assured, okay, he or she was not the person, he or she is not the person now that they were when they previously entered into this arena. They are a wiser person. They've digested the wisdom, so they are a sharper person. They've digested the wisdom, so they are a stronger person. Then we no longer experience the same sense of anxiety and nerves in a similar context, because we've imbibed wisdom, which allows us to see things clearly, to see ourselves clearly, and to know how to deal wisely. In other words, again, on an individual level, we've transformed harm into inner harmony through healing. So through spiritual wisdom, and in our tradition, we have very many books of spiritual wisdom, such as the Bhagavad Gita as it is, such as the Srimad Bhagavatam and other books. When we have that deeper wisdom, we see the world differently. And then we start to understand that when we see discord on a societal level, the first thing we have to do is to look inside. It is far easier to tell the world what to do than it is to actually heal the individual that we are. But when we look at creating lasting, sustainable harmony, then we come to point number 3. It is whole individuals that create harmonious relationships and harmonious societies. And it is broken individuals, disharmonious individuals, who actually and ultimately create all of the disharmony that we see in the world. So I have many mentors, but I also have many mentees, many people who I tried to, or who've asked me rather, who I tried to serve as a guide. And we often talk about this. We often talk about how through our discussions on wisdom, through our particular spiritual meditative practices, through our own introspection, how we can become more whole as individuals. And this is a message that we've been trying to share with the world for literally decades, and it's really powerful. I've seen the benefits in my own life. I can honestly say that. I've seen the benefits in my own life, and it's very, very powerful. In other words, we can do tremendous things to transform society. We can make tremendous strides. But if we want to make that effect sustainable, systemic, and systematic, then that transformation must take place from the inside out. It must take place from the inside out. So sometimes, again, let's speak very openly and honestly. Sometimes people will assert that the people in positions of power, they are corrupt, or they're exploitative, or they're not doing a good job, and we need to get rid of them, and we need to put someone else in. And oftentimes when they say we need to put someone else in, often what they mean is they should be in that position. But as Einstein said, I cannot solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it. So if we don't work on ourselves, we think this person is corrupted by power, but how do I know that I wouldn't be corrupted by power? This person is corrupted by fame and prestige, but how do I know that I wouldn't be corrupted by fame and prestige? This person is corrupted by money, but how do I know that I wouldn't be corrupted by money? Because when we are in positions of power, what happens is whatever we are becomes amplified. So I often see people who are so quick to condemn other people and so weak to work on themselves. And therefore, you can just see that as much as that person's in a position of power, they will create the same problems, the same issues, the same inequity of their predecessors. So we really need a transformation in society. But this is, I often use this term, this way of looking at things, the way I'm describing, this is for the brave hearts. This is for people who are mature enough, wise enough, and humble. It takes humility. It takes humility to recognize that in many cases, we're not better than the people that we condemn. It takes humility to recognize that in many cases, we're not better than the people that we criticize. We just may have a different context. So I don't know about you, but I've seen in my own life that one of the most powerful journeys is the inner journey. But that journey is for a certain level of people who have a certain level of maturity, who can recognize that when I get too triggered by externals, it means that there's some kind of weakness within myself. My own spiritual mentor often spoke about that. He said, if someone else's bad behavior makes you too disturbed, it means that you yourself have not developed such a strong level of harmony and such a strong level of groundedness within yourself, which is why you're so easily affected by what people are doing or what they're not doing. It takes some strength of character to embrace such a message. But the rewards are phenomenal. It takes strength of character to embrace the message that I must become the change myself that I would like to see in humanity. This is for the brave hearts. Right? It's very easy in this world to consider oneself as a victim and to look at everyone else as a perpetrator. But to turn around and to look inside and to think, what do I need to change about myself so that I can be a real change agent with other people? And what does it mean to be a change agent? A change agent means to be the example. The time for theory has ended because people are so skeptical now that the only way that we can make lasting change in society is to be an example of exactly the things that we would like to see in society. I see many people and they're so quick to tell everyone else what to do, but they're such poor examples themselves. And yet we fool ourselves so much that if I was in that position, everything would be okay. This is how blind we've become. So in summary, we're looking at this idea of harm in society that's causing so much discord. And we're seeing that harm is an expansion of a discord that exists within ourselves. We're looking at this constant desire for harmony amongst all the human family. In fact, amongst all creatures, we're constantly on this journey away from harm towards harmony. And we have this theme that in order to heal, in order to move from harm to harmony, it requires the healing of love. And in order to give love in an ongoing and meaningful way, without burning out and without exploitation, one must be connected to the source of all love. And the source of all love within the Bhakti Yoga tradition, it's very clearly understood that the source of all love is the Supreme Person. In different traditions, they may call him by different names. Within the Bhakti Yoga tradition, we have a very sweet name for that Supreme Person, Krishna. Why is that name so sweet? Because it literally means that personality who is all attractive. Man is in the religion business, or humans are in the religion business, but the Supreme Person, he is in the relationship business. So as we engage in our reflection, everything is coming from the Supreme. Let me deal with everything with gratitude to the Supreme. As we engage in our reflections with other people, let me see that every person I'm dealing with is a member of the divine family, is literally a member of the Supreme Person's family, and let me deal with them with that understanding. As we live in such a way that let me connect to the source of unlimited love in order to be an instrument of that love in human society. Let me constantly connect, and very powerful way of connecting. In literally all theistic traditions, one of the most powerful means of connecting is to call upon or meditate upon or chant the holy names of the Supreme Person. These sacred names are a spiritual or transcendental sound, and just by chanting those holy names, whether we chant the name as Krishna or even other genuine names in other traditions, we're literally drawing upon that divine love, connecting to that divine love, and we're literally flooding the world and flooding our own life in that ecstasy and that affection. So we wanted to leave you some of these considerations. We sincerely wish you well on your journey, and please remember that the love that you give pursues you. Thank you very much, and I'll stop now and hear any questions that you may have. So I'll pass over to the facilitators.
Krishna, thank you so much, Prabhu. That was an amazing talk. We actually have a number of questions which I'll read out to you. So the first one is from Vrindapriya, who asks, you speak about divine connection as a way to be instruments of love and healing and to avoid burnout. I see japa as a means of divine connection, but although it's a daily practice, I'm ashamed to say I don't experience taste. How can we make that divine connection more and more real?
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Vrindapriya, for a brilliant question, and thank you for being on the call today. It's a very good question. I was thinking about this. I was preparing a seminar called The Economics of Kirtan. And just for those who may not be aware, but it's very powerful in the yoga community as well, Kirtan is another way of connecting with these sacred, transcendental names of divinity. And the special quality, or one of the many special qualities of Kirtan, is that it is done as a collective. It is a collective union with the Supreme through instrument and the collective chanting of divine names. And I would say that one of the most powerful things that can help us to empower our own individual practice, which is what we call, or what we mean by this term, japa. One of the ways to empower our own individual practice of the chanting of the names is to do this also more as a collective. And when we do it as a collective with a real focus on hearing those divine names, then we start to associate that same joy, that same fulfillment with the same holy names that we are also chanting when we do our individual practice. So that's one thing that we can try. We can do more kirtan and do it with more attention and more awareness. There's one other thing that we can do, and that is we can also, see, this is the powerful thing about Bhakti Yoga. With Bhakti Yoga, which is a path of divine connection, we're not making the connection by our own ability. We're making the connection by grace. So Vrindapriya, another thing that you can do, another thing that we can do, before we engage in our own japa or divine name connection, is we can literally pray to that divine name or those divine names. Please bless me with that connection with you. So we can do these two things, more attentive, aware kirtan, and we can also pray to the divine names. Please help me make my relationship with you strong so that I can also be an instrument of your grace and experience your grace unlimitedly, abundantly, as I move about moment by moment. Some things we can try. Okay, before I forget, there's one other thing. It just comes and I think I should share this. Just as we have a deeper connection with a person, the more that we appreciate them and appreciate their good qualities and how much they've helped us and how much they've brought wonderful qualities into our own life. The other thing in relation to our chanting of divine names is that I would encourage you, Vrinda Priya, to take the time to read about and learn about the glories of the divine names. Because the more that you understand how incredibly sacred, powerful, and valuable these divine names are, the more that you will naturally be more attentive in the chanting of those divine names. So these are 3 things that can help: kirtan, prayer, and learning or awareness about the power, the potency, and the glory of those divine names. Thank you for your question.
Excellent answer, Prabhu. The next set of questions are all anonymous. So the first one is, sometimes it just feels so unrealistic to only have good association, especially when we work in the corporate world. How can I protect myself? And also, what do I do if I'm attracted to that association? I really want to progress in my career, and networking is really important. Mm-hmm. How can you give me some advice?
Okay. There is no such thing as bad association, right? Because you can learn from everyone. So the point is, as we interact with people, there's 2 things to do. One is to look for that which you can learn from an individual. There is no one who is completely bad. Even if an individual behaves badly, we can still take the gift from their bad example because we can learn what we shouldn't do. So that's the first point. Second is, when we talk about association in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, there's a very slightly technical meaning to association. And association in the more technical sense is literally who you allow to enter into the chamber of your heart. In other words, it is one thing to be around someone physically. That doesn't mean that you're having association. But when you allow someone's more materialistic values to enter into your heart, then by that mistake, you allow those materialistic values to enter into your life. And by that mistake, your life goes down. And we close the doors to deeper, more divine happiness and fulfillment. So yes, we want to navigate our careers, but you should ask yourself why. There's nothing wrong with navigating careers, but we should do it in such a way that we navigate through the career to happiness. No one cares about their career as per se. Think about this carefully. If I was to say to you, I'm going to give you a career which will be the envy of everyone in the world, okay? So I'm going to give you a career. You will have huge amounts of money. You will have huge amounts of prestige. You will have huge amounts of reputation and recognition. But I'll give it to you on one condition. You have to sign this contract, okay? You have to sign this contract that says that you will have all these external things, but you give away your rights to any happiness from those things, right? So you have prestige, you have reputation, you have money, you have, all of these things. You have, position, but you have to sign a contract to say that you're prepared to get all of these things, but you're prepared to forfeit any happiness from those things. No one would sign that contract. So let's be very clear. The career that we are wanting is a medium through which we are trying to experience pleasure. We should always understand these things in proper context. So what we're saying in the Bhakti Yoga tradition is that, yes, have your career, right? Because if it's utilized properly, it will provide things which are necessary to sustain us as a human in a healthy way. It's important. We should have those careers. But do it in such a way that it does not also impede an even deeper level of fulfillment that can be only had as we engage in direct divine practices as well. So it shouldn't be one or the other, but we should take our career and we should utilize it in such a way that does not close the doors to a deeper level of divine fulfillment. Okay, so you associate with people in a way that's wise and in a way that you learn from them, but you do not become brought down by any negative traits that they may have. And the last thing that's important in relation to your question then is that there's also, and I call this the ratio effect, the ratio of people that you positively want to be around because they have very great qualities against the ratio of people that you have to be around because it's just something that's in your space, for example, in your work environment. So you should always make sure that there's a balance, because when you're dealing with people that you have to be around in the work environment, that's duty. But who do you associate with when you have a choice? That ratio of balance and that wise balance keeps everything in good check. So the work environment, you can't choose who you associate with, but you can choose how you learn from them and which values you allow to enter into the heart. So you do the best you can in that environment. So you can navigate, network, that's fine. But when you're out of the work environment, you should definitely proactively and consciously seek the association of people who are more spiritually mature than you and who inspire you to grow in your spiritual maturity. If you do those things, you will always remain safe and protected on your journey. Okay, next question.
Thank you. So this one again is anonymous. There are times when I find it difficult to draw a line between spiritual quotient and emotional quotient. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like I'm getting spiritual help or receiving, but it's actually emotional or sometimes even superficial.
Okay, so it's interesting. Thank you for that, because to your question, what I would actually say to you is you don't need to draw the line. And I'll explain what I mean by that. This slide, IQ, EQ, and SQ, this slide is actually a build. In other words, someone may have IQ, but they don't have EQ. Someone may have EQ, but they don't have so much IQ. But if you have spiritual intelligence, automatically that includes EQ and IQ, if it's real and mature spiritual intelligence. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Sometimes someone can be spiritual and someone can help another person on their spiritual journey just by showing sufficient love, care, and compassion. So on the spiritual journey, for example, we may recognize, okay, I am not this body, I'm a soul. So the body is like a garment, and in the Bhagavad Gita, in this conversation, which is the Bhagavad Gita, that is one of the first lessons that are shared, is that actually you're not this body. Now, that is a fact. And you know what? It's a very powerful fact. It's not just a philosophical fact. It's a powerful fact. I was studying this and I was meditating on this. And I wanted to share something with you. I'm going to plant this seed, but how this seed grows is down to you. I've seen over decades that as we all grow old, the people who actually deeply accept that they're not the body, even their physical body grows old differently to people who embrace the body as their ultimate identity. It's a trap for those people who hold on to bodily identity, and that means people who take that as their primary identity, whether it's on the platform of gender, whether it's on the platform of race, whether it's even on the platform of age or orientation of any type. For people who embrace that, as they grow older, because they're more tied into the bodily identity, then whatever troubles or pains that the body goes through, they experience it much more intensely, right? So the body is a machine. So you could say that everyone has to experience in life some pain. Yes, but suffering is optional. Okay? Suffering is optional. Yes, pain must be there because the body will break down and ultimately will die. But suffering is optional. So when we talk about being spiritual, so we recognize that, let's say someone is having some kind of health issue and you show compassion and care. So you say, well, it's emotion. I'm showing some emotional intelligence by showing compassion and care. Not necessarily. The next question is, why are you showing compassion and care? If you're showing compassion and care to help them to be inspired to keep moving forward on their spiritual journey, to keep moving forward on their spiritual practice, to keep moving forward with enthusiasm in their spiritual community, then even though you've shown compassion and care because they had some health concern, it will ultimately lead to them being more enthusiastic to move forward in their spiritual journey. So spiritual intelligence includes emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence. It includes all three because, in other words, let's look at it like this. It's not just a question of what you do. It's a question of why you do it and who you are doing it for. So I was having this discussion with my wife, and we were reflecting upon this because we were thinking back about parenting, our childhood, etc. You sometimes see parents who look after their children, but they're looking after their children and they're trying to get their children to be in a good position. Why? It's not really about the child. They want to bring the child out in the dinner parties and say how much money their child is earning and how their child works for a big firm and their child is making lots of money. All of this stuff, it's all the undigested ambitions of the parent which they're trying to experience through their children. You see? So they're doing so-called many of the right things, but it's all with a selfish motive, and the child picks it up. And that same child, when they're older, they start to become very bitter and resentful towards their parents. I didn't want to go to medical school. Mum forced me to go to medical school. I didn't want to do this particular profession. Dad forced me to do the particular profession. And they feel literally disgusted with their parents. Now, you could look at it and say, encouraging your child to do their homework, have good health, to eat their food. None of these things are wrong. The issue was why you were doing it. So when we talk about spiritual intelligence and divine laws, we go back to the example we gave earlier. We want to see each and every person as literally a member of the Supreme Person's divine family. We want to see them as gifts from God, but we want to reciprocate with that gift by dealing with them in a way that the Supreme Person would be pleased. In other words, is it my agenda or is it the Supreme Person's agenda? So if you take that vision and that conclusion, I deal with them in a way that the Supreme will be pleased, you will never have any issue, and you'll never have an issue in terms of getting confused about the two, because it's not what you're doing. Well, not always, as long as you're not doing anything very grossly negative, but it's mostly why I'm doing it. And of course, the caveat here is that we try to have proper understanding to know how can I interact with this person in the best way so that they can be all that they can be in their relationship with the Supreme Person.
Great, thank you, Bhuta. The next question is also anonymous. Thank you for your wonderful class and insights. What are some strategies that a beginner in Bhakti Yoga can cope with, who can use to cope with burnout we experience in the secular world? We spend more time there than we do with family, devotees, and friends. This burnout often transfers into our spiritual practice, resulting in fatigue.
Okay, so one has to first of all become self-aware, because I was putting together a seminar on how people can find their ideal career. And I was thinking about that this morning, and I was thinking about three things, okay? So the first one is talent, right? So what do you have a natural skill and interest in? So talent is one dimension. The second dimension, which people don't talk about, is temperament, okay? So for example, if you're an extrovert, you need to do something where you're around and interacting with people. If you choose a career where you have to spend many, many hours and most of the day on your own, you'll hate it. You'll hate it. It doesn't matter whether that career has lots of prestige and money. You'll hate it because it goes against your temperament. And these things don't change, by the way, right? There's some kind of myth that goes around in modern society that you're like a blank slate and that it doesn't matter what you do and you'll be happy. It's a big problem, right? So it's about self-awareness and self-knowledge. And that self-knowledge comes by introspection. It comes by reading books of wisdom, such as the Bhagavad Gita, but it also comes by having honest and open conversations with people who know us and who love us and who've been around us for many years, so that they can tell us the truth. You tend to function like this, right? So first is talent. What are you good at? And what are you interested in, right? So that overlap. So you're good at and you're interested in it, not just one or the other. It's got to actually be both. So talent. Second is temperament. Okay, what's your temperament? So some people are naturally more sensitive. So then going into a career or situation where you're constantly being shouted at and under pressure, it doesn't work. And that relates to the third point, by the way. So first T is talent. Second T is temperament. Third T is tolerance. Please do not fool yourself into thinking that all jobs are equal. No, some jobs by their very nature are more high pressure. So if people have different thresholds of resilience, you can increase it, but you can only increase it within a certain bandwidth. So so there's strategies I've seen my friends do. Some of them are not highly resilient, but they've made a strategy to go into an environment and a workplace which is high pressure, but they're there for a short period of time. They know it's high pressure. They know it's going to affect them, but they're going to go in. They've got a particular outcome that they're trying to achieve, whether it's financial or otherwise. They're giving themselves a certain period of time, and when they hit that target, they're out. They say, "Oh, I'm going to make this much in this many years, and I'm going to get out of it because I know if I spend more time, many years in this environment, I'm going to burn out." Right. So that's one strategy you can take. Or another thing you can do is you can find ways to offload the pressure. And we all know about this, right? So, and again, you can only do this to some extent, but there has to be the ratio of pressure coming in and then pressure being released. Okay, so you have to look at this. This is the kind of thing you need to speak through with close friends or family or a mentor, because to do this, you have to look at the specifics of your situation and the specifics of your own constitution or character. You know, it's really important to look at these two things and see what's my natural resilience capacity and what's my actual situation, because then you can see what are the variables you can play with in order to make sure that you can have the healthy ratio of pressure coming in, which is often beyond your control, but you may have some power of control, and the things that you're doing to offset that pressure. Now, one very simple example is exercise. We know that exercise helps to relieve a certain level of pressure. Okay, so knowing about that, diet can also help to relieve a certain level of pressure. Good meditative practices can also help to relieve a certain level of pressure. So you have to look at the specifics in your situation to get the balance right. If you don't get the balance right, what happens is you can get away with it in the short term, but in the long term, you'll suffer so much that it practically wasn't worth the effort. So please be kind to yourself. And it starts with that self-awareness. Okay.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I apologize to everyone whose questions we won't be able to get to. The last one here is from Yashoda. In my reading yesterday, I had the realization that the peace formula is even more applicable to us as individuals, not just as humanity. Can you talk further on this?
Yes. So the peace formula, if I understand the particular reference, it's actually from a book called The Science of Self-Realization. And in essence, to be really honest, in essence, the peace formula has a lot to do with our connection again to Krishna, our connection to divinity. You know, see, we're seeking something external, but that thing which is causing us, that is driving us to seek things externally, is to do with an internal emptiness or some kind of lacking inside. So we're not saying that external pursuits are necessarily bad. They're not. There's many things which are external pursuits which can be very healthy and helpful. We do need our career. We do need our, let's say, hobbies or interests, but we're saying that whatever else that you do, it is extremely powerful, and it will actually enhance everything else that you do that's progressive. If we also spend some quality time each and every day to do 3 things. One is associate with people who are more spiritually developed than we are on this bhakti yoga path. That's one thing. Number 2, read about spiritual wisdom, specifically the spiritual teachings in bhakti yoga. You can find that information presented very, very nicely in books such as Bhagavad Gita as it is. And there's also, to be honest, and I'm going to do this as a shameless plug, my own spiritual mentor wrote many books on bhakti yoga. And these are now available on Amazon in a Kindle form, but also as paperback. And they're very accessible. And they talk a lot about how to apply spiritual wisdom practically in our everyday life. One of my favorites is a book called Spiritual Warrior Number 2. And the author, his name is B for Brit. So B, the letter B, the letter T, and then Swami. So you can look it up, B.T. Swami. And it's a Spiritual Warrior series. They're very easy to read and full of insights about how we can go on this spiritual journey practically and how it can synergize with our lifestyle as well. So those are, so the peace formula, so A is association of more spiritually developed people. B is reading books of spiritual wisdom. C is the chanting of divine names. Okay, so when we do that practice of mantra meditation, sacred divine names also help us to elevate our awareness, our perception, and to feel a deeper level of fulfillment as we become more and more expert in that practice. So that in a nutshell is some of the thoughts around our peace formula.